Anytime anybody tells you all remakes suck, you can tell them two things. You can tell them John Carpenter's The Thing, and you can tell them David Cronenberg's The Fly. And on this week's episode of Horror Timelines, we're going to check out The Fly series, both the classic and the remake. We know that it's a good movie, but does the continuity make any sense? Let's find out what the buzz is. Way back in 1958, The Fly started buzzing, and the film starts off with a man found dead in a massive press. Dr. Phibes is here, and this guy's name is Gaston, so I guess that no one is as quick as him, or as slick as him, or neck as incredibly as thick as him. The dead guy is Vince's brother, and his wife killed him, but she acts really peculiar when people try to kill a fly. After some time, she finally tells her side of the story, and we meet Andre, scientist, as he shows off his new invention, which, for some reason, needs plenty of neon tubing, and turns out to be a teleporter, with a few kinks to work out. After a seemingly successful test, he puts a cat in there. Don't tell PETA. And it doesn't go well. He tries again with a guinea pig, and it finally works, but pretty soon he's locked himself in the lab for a few days. When Helene enters, he keeps his head and hand covered up and wants her to find a fly for him, and reveals his hand to be a spooky claw. He reveals that he transferred himself, and a fly was in the machine with him, mixing their beings, and he must now find the fly to be able to revert back. Just when they think they caught it, it gets away, although I think this string helped. Andre starts losing his mind, becoming more of an insect, so as a last-ditch effort, he goes through the machine again, but it doesn't work, and his fly face is revealed. He destroys the lab and says his goodbye, and has his wife crush his head in the industrial press, taking us back to the beginning of the film. No one believes her story, and they go to arrest her until they find the fly in a spider's web. It has Andre's head and hand, and they crush it with a rock, and since there's no date at all, we're going with real-time 1958. 1 year later, we saw the return of the fly in 1959, now in black and white. It starts with Helene's funeral, and Francois is back, and he tells us that it's years later. Young Philippe is here, all grown up, so we're at least 10 years after the last one. Online sources are at odds, with some saying that this is 15 years later, and some saying 12, and I'm going with 12, which would place Philippe in his early 20s, and would better explain the fact that Francois doesn't age. Inspector Beecham is here, and he apparently worked with Inspector Karras from the first film. They go back to the lab, and Philippe starts to try to complete his old man's work. His new partner turns out to be a spy and sells him out, and they successfully recreate the experiment, but Holmes uses it to dispose of an investigator, and it crosses with a guinea pig. Philippe catches him, but Holmes puts him in a chamber, and since he's afraid of them, he puts a fly in there with him and turns it on. Kind of a dick thing to do, dude. When they bring him back, his head and hand have been flyed, which is a pretty unfortunate family coincidence. His head is bigger, and the mask is apparently hard to keep on, judging from these shots. There's a fly with Philippe's head here, although I don't know where his hand is supposed to be. They catch the little guy while the big boy gets his revenge, and hey, his foot's a fly too. He makes it back home, and Beecham puts him back in the machine with the fly, and Philippe is restored. So since 12 years would place this one in 1970, and it really doesn't look like it, we'll push the first one back a few years, let's say 1952, which would make this one 1964, which makes a bit more sense with the clothes and cars, but still not really. That happy ending lasted 6 years until 1965 gave us The Curse of the Fly. We meet Martin Delambre, who has the same last name as Andre and Philippe, so I guess he's related. We then meet Albert, Martin's brother, and their father, Henry, who is clearly not Philippe. He says 3 generations of Delambre have devoted their lives to the teleporter, so Henry here is Philippe's grown son, and he's at least in his 50s and wasn't born in the last one, so this would have to be at least like 2014? Okay. Martin starts a romance with a woman that he finds on the side of the road in her underwear, which is apparently this version of 2014's Tinder. And he proposes her after 1 week. 1 week. The girl he found on the side of the road. In her underwear. Down the street from the asylum. Okay. Martin has a secret as he rashes up, but their teleporter seems to work, but there's something in the stables. Things get confusing when they bring back Inspector Charis from the first film, and he's old and in bed, but not like 40 years older, so it's starting to look like this isn't an actual sequel to the previous events, but is instead a separate continuity in which the timeline is very different. Most likely due to the cars and hairs, it's meant to take place in 1965, and it turns out that Martin has a previous wife who's deformed, and the other experiments are pretty creepy looking too. Charis tells the story of Martin's grandfather and makes it seem like he's talking about Andre, but shows a picture of Philippe. They retcon the first film and say that Andre's son restored him using the fly, mixing the end of the first and second film. So it's now totally clear that this is a new continuity, separate from the other two, although features a backstory that is an amalgam of them. Speaking of amalgams, they accidentally fuse 2 test subjects, and they teleport Henry without realizing that Albert has already destroyed his end of the machine, and he's lost. Patricia escapes Martin, and he dies from the side effects of the experiment, and there's no fly even in this one, and it's definitely one of the weirder sequels in any series. The franchise went dormant for quite a while, and it wasn't until 1986's remake by David Cronenberg that The Fly was born again. We meet Seth Brundle as he snares an interview with Ronnie here, and he shows her his new invention, the telepods. They're teleporters, and Seth is shocked that Ronnie's a journalist. So I'm not quite sure what he thought that she meant when she said that she had other interviews to conduct. He invites her to write a book about his experiments, and she begins using a 1980s camcorder as his first experiment with a living creature goes wrong. They hook up, which gives him inspiration to fix his program, and successfully teleports a monkey. This magazine cover shows a date of 1986, so that's our date for this one, and in a fit of drunken jealousy, Seth decides to teleport himself. But of course, a fly gets into the machine with him. It's in the title. And he starts changing immediately. He becomes more agile, more hyper, and looking good in little shorts. He starts losing control, breaks a dude's arm, and then his teeth and nails start falling out. He finds out that he and the fly have been fused on the genetic level, and 4 weeks later, he's completely degenerated. Soon, he can dance on the ceiling, pukes on his food to dissolve it, and Ronnie discovers that she's pregnant. Cronenberg himself pops up into her maggot baby dream, and Seth goes further off the deep end because, after all, he did just lose his penis. And when Ronnie decides to end the pregnancy, he goes to get her and cripples her ex/boss, and his plan is to hook up a third pod and put her and the baby in one, and him into the second, so they all fuse together into one. She fights back, and he rapidly mutates into a final form, a massive insect-human hybrid, and Stathis interferes, fusing the Brundlefly with the pod itself. It then begs Ronnie to kill it, which she does. 3 more years go by, and in 1989 we return with The Fly 2, which introduces us to Bartok Industries, which was only spoken about in the first film. A replacement Ronnie, who I guess never got the abortion for some reason, is about to give birth. Stathis is here, and the baby is a big larval thing, and Ronnie dies on the table, so we're only like 6 or 7 months after the first one. And since that was late in 86, this beginning is set in 87. And inside the larva is a regular baby. We jump to 11 months later, and the kid's growing very quickly, and his name is Martin, and he's a genius. Bartok is trying to recreate the telepods, but isn't having much success. And then shortly, Martin is 5 years old and looks like a fired Marty McFly. That would place us in 1992 now, and Bartok recruits Martin to help with the pods. He watches deleted scenes from the first film, and meets Princess Vespa, who has no clue that she's sitting on a 5-year-old. They start to bond, and Martin discovers that they're keeping the failed experiments alive, so he puts the poor little guy down. Martin then fixes the code and succeeds in teleporting organic matter, and then they bang. Movie. Movie. You're the one that told me that he's 5. You stressed that, and now you're showing me have sex. You're showing me a 5-year-old having sex. I know that he has a body of a grown man, but you told me he's 5. Thanks. He starts to mutate, and Bartok turns out to be a dick, so he escapes and goes to see Stathis, and then very quickly starts to fully transform, and I guess cocoon. Do flies cocoon? He and Beth get taken back, and when he emerges, he's this much bigger, dog-friendly thing. It has acid vomit too, and super strength, and resistance to bullets. And then Martin tries his experiment. He basically transfers mutant genes into another subject, in this case, Bartok, basically filtering himself and leaving Bartok a mutated mass. Martin's cured, while Bartok basically becomes the dog, and they show a fly, although this movie is a lot less fly and more giant mutant monster. There was also a short comic book series in 2015 following the story of Martin Brundle, but no further films were created. So there you have it. It's 5 movies, 3 separate continuities. I guess technically 2, but it's really 3. The Curse of the Fly is its own thing. You don't have to have seen any of the others to watch it. As a matter of fact, it actually makes more sense if you don't watch the others, because you'll be too confused about what it's supposed to be a sequel to. And the answer is none. It's the sequel to a movie that didn't happen. It's based on the events of the first movie, but the events of the first movie happen in a very different fashion. I liked all of these. Curse of the Fly was a little bit boring, and again, there's no fly in it, but they were all a lot of fun. David Cronenberg's The Fly is one of the best horror movies of all time. If you haven't seen it, I would stress very, very heavily that you should see it. It is a fantastic masterpiece of film. It's fantastic. Also, the original Fly is very, very good. Great performances all around. I know that everyone always cites the very, very silly ending scene with the help me, but it's also a very, very enjoyable movie beyond that. I loved it. The Return of the Fly was great also. Even The Fly 2, which was kind of a bad movie, but it wasn't that bad. It was I had fun. There was some pretty fun practical effects in that. So I don't know, check them out if you get a chance. Let me know what you thought of them. Put it down in the comment below. Let me know what you thought of any of the Fly movies. Let me know if you think I'm wrong on any of this stuff. Always like to hear that. Let me know what else you'd like to see. Also, like, subscribe, do all that normal stuff, and check out the Patreon page. Please let me know if you want to support this channel, give me some help making these videos and get them made on a more frequent basis, and make them better. Yeah, so that's about it for this week's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in another couple weeks for another great video. Thanks, guys.